In the sun-drenched landscape of San Mateo County, California, a new political force was rising. It wasn't a stock or a digital currency, but an idea so powerful it might as well have been minted. This was the birth of what many would come to call Corpus coin, a term that symbolized the political capital of Christina Corpus, a charismatic candidate vying to become the county's next sheriff. In 2022, she ran on a platform of change, promising to break down old barriers and reform an institution she claimed was stuck in the past. Her message was about transparency, accountability, and building a bridge between law enforcement and the diverse communities it served. For many, she was a breath of fresh air. The inspiration behind this movement was deeply rooted in the American dream of progress. Christina Corpus presented herself as an outsider ready to challenge the status quo. She was a woman, a Latina, aiming to lead a department historically dominated by men. Her supporters saw her as a pioneer, someone who could finally bring a new perspective to public safety. They invested their hopes, their votes, and their trust in her, making her political stock soar. This initial investment of public faith was the true Corpus coin, a currency built not on blockchain, but on the belief that she would deliver on her promises and usher in a new, more inclusive era for San Mateo County. People were drawn to the story. It was a classic American tale of an underdog fighting against an entrenched system. Corpus spoke with a passion that resonated with voters who felt unheard or overlooked. She talked about modernizing the sheriff's office, fostering better relationships with the community, and ensuring that every resident felt safe and respected. Her campaign rallies felt less like political events and more like community gatherings, filled with energy and optimism. Every handshake, every speech, and every sign planted on a lawn was a transaction, adding value to the intangible currency of her reputation and the movement she was building. This powerful narrative of reform and representation became the very foundation of her political value. The coin wasn't something you could hold, but its worth was felt across the county. It represented a vote for a different future, a rejection of old guard politics, and a collective investment in a leader who seemed poised to make history. When she won the election in 2022, becoming the first female and first Latina sheriff of San Mateo County, it seemed as though the value of Corpus coin had reached an all-time high. The community had cashed in their hopes and received, they believed, a leader who would finally champion their interests. In the beginning, the movement behind Christina Corpus was a small but fiercely dedicated coalition. It started not in grand halls of power, but in living rooms, community centers, and local coffee shops. Early adopters of the Corpus coin were everyday citizens, teachers, small business owners, and community activists who were tired of the old way of doing things. They saw in Corpus a leader who not only listened but seemed to genuinely understand their concerns. They volunteered their time, knocked on doors, and spread her message through word of mouth, slowly building a grassroots network that would become the backbone of her campaign and her eventual victory. These were the true believers. Among the key figures in these early days was Victor Enley, her campaign manager. Enley was a strategist, a confidant, and a powerful voice within the inner circle. He helped shape the campaign's message, turning Corpus's vision into a compelling narrative that captivated voters. He was seen as the architect behind the scenes, working tirelessly to ensure that the campaign's momentum never faltered. Together, Corpus and Enley formed a dynamic duo, their partnership fueling the engine of the reform movement. Their shared passion and strategic alignment were critical in convincing the public that their investment in this new leadership would pay dividends for the entire community. The early days were marked by an infectious optimism. Supporters felt like they were part of something historic, a genuine people-powered movement that was about to make a real difference. They organized fundraisers, hosted meet and greets, and used social media to amplify their message, creating a buzz that was impossible to ignore. Each new supporter was another investor in Corpus coin, and its value grew with every new convert. The excitement was palpable. People truly believed that they were on the cusp of electing a sheriff who would prioritize public trust above all else, healing old wounds and forging a stronger, more united county. This period was defined by promise and potential. The coin was still fresh from the mint, its surface gleaming with the hope of a brighter future. The small circle of early believers had successfully transformed their faith into a county-wide phenomenon, They had taken a calculated risk on a new kind of leader, and as election day drew near, it felt like their bet was about to pay off spectacularly. They had no idea that the very foundations they were celebrating would soon be shaken by controversy, or that the close partnership at the heart of their movement would eventually become its greatest liability. The ascent was thrilling, but a steep fall was waiting in the wings. The victory in November 2022 was monumental. When Christina Corpus was sworn in as sheriff, the value of Corpus coins seemed to skyrocket. She had shattered glass ceilings, and a wave of celebration swept through her supporters. The media hailed her as a trailblazer, a symbol of progress for California and the nation. For a time, it appeared that the community's investment was sound. She began her term with bold pronouncements about reform, promising to increase transparency and hold her department to a higher standard. Her initial actions were met with praise, and it felt like San Mateo County was finally turning a new page, just as she had promised during her inspiring campaign. However, it wasn't long before the first cracks began to appear in the polished facade. Whispers started to circulate within the sheriff's office. Deputies and staff members spoke in hushed tones about a change in the atmosphere, a sense of favoritism, and an exclusionary command style. The collaborative spirit promised on the campaign trail seemed to be fading, replaced by a more insular and defensive posture. These were not public scandals yet, just quiet murmurs of discontent from within the ranks. But these early tremors were a warning sign that the foundations of her leadership might not be as solid as her supporters believed. The coin was beginning to lose its luster. The first major public event that signaled trouble was the creation of a new, high-paying position that had not been publicly advertised. Eyebrows were raised when it was announced that Victor Enley, her former campaign manager, had been appointed as her chief of staff with a staggering salary of $246,000. This move struck many as a classic case of political patronage, a reward for loyalty rather than a decision based on merit or public process. For a leader who had championed transparency, this secret appointment felt like a profound betrayal. The whispers grew louder, and the media began to take notice. The narrative of the reformist hero was starting to unravel. This appointment marked a turning point. The public's trust, the very thing that gave Corpus coin its value, began to erode. People started to question whether the promise of a new day was just an empty slogan. The decision to place a close political ally in such a powerful and lucrative position without any public input looked like the very kind of old guard politics Corpus had vowed to dismantle. What was once a story of hope and progress was now becoming tainted with suspicion and cronyism. The coin, once a symbol of change, was now being viewed with a growing sense of skepticism and disappointment. At the heart of the Corpus administration was a tight-knit inner circle, and no one was closer to the center than Victor Enel. His role transcended that of a typical chief of staff. He was the gatekeeper, the enforcer, and the sheriff's most trusted advisor. This created an environment where access and influence were tightly controlled, leaving many long-serving members of the sheriff's office feeling ostracized and demoralized. Allegiance to Corpus and Enley became the most valuable currency within the department, more important than experience or expertise. Those who were in the circle were rewarded, while those on the outside were marginalized, their voices silenced. This dynamic fostered an atmosphere of fear and retaliation. One of the most glaring examples was the case of Captain Brian Phillip, an employee who reportedly faced retribution after falling out of favor with the new leadership. Another was Carlos Tapia, the president of the Sheriff's Labor Union, who found himself targeted. Corpus allegedly ordered Tapia's arrest without probable cause, a shocking abuse of power that sent a clear message to anyone who dared to challenge her authority. These actions were not just internal squabbles, they were direct assaults on the principles of fairness and justice that a sheriff is sworn to uphold, causing a steep decline in the value of the Corpus coin. The stories of those who felt betrayed by the administration began to multiply. These were not just political opponents, but dedicated public servants who had initially hoped that Corpus would be the reform-minded leader she claimed to be. They had invested their professional hopes in her, only to find themselves pushed aside or targeted for speaking up. Their disillusionment became a powerful counter-narrative to the one Corpus had so carefully crafted. They saw her promises of transparency as a hollow marketing tactic, and her calls for accountability as something that only applied to her critics, not to herself or her inner circle. The trust that had once bound the community to her was now shattered. The coin was becoming toxic. The very people who were supposed to help her build a new and better institution were now leaking stories to the press and filing official complaints. Instead of building bridges, her leadership style had created deep divisions, pitting colleague against colleague. The inner circle, designed to protect her, had become a fortress that isolated her from reality and from the people she was elected to serve. This betrayal of public trust was not just a political misstep, it was a moral failure that would ultimately lead to her downfall. The controversy surrounding Victor Enley soon escalated into a full-blown scandal that would honestly rock San Mateo County. It was more than just a case of political cronyism. In 2024, explosive allegations surfaced detailing an inappropriate romantic relationship between Sheriff Corpus and her chief of staff. This revelation, transformed the narrative from one of poor judgment to one of profound ethical compromise. The personal and professional lines had been blurred, creating a toxic power dynamic at the very top of the county's primary law enforcement agency. The Corpus coin was now in freefall, its value plummeting as the sordid details became public. The affair raised serious questions about Enl's qualifications and his immense influence. Critics argued that his position and six-figure salary were not earned through merit, but were a direct result of his personal relationship with the sheriff. The situation grew even more alarming when it was revealed that Enla, a non-sworn civilian, had been given access to serious weaponry, including rifles fitted with silencing devices. This egregious breach of protocol suggested a shocking disregard for public safety and the rules that govern law enforcement. The image of a political appointee handling specialized police weapons sent a chill through the community and law enforcement alike. The scandal was further inflamed by accusations from within the sheriff's office that Corpus used her power to protect Enley and retaliate against anyone who questioned his authority. Allegations emerged that she had used racist and homophobic slurs to demean colleagues, painting a picture of a leader who ruled through intimidation and fear rather than respect and integrity. A blistering audit in 2025 confirmed many of these claims, finding evidence of widespread misconduct, misuse of authority, and a pattern of behavior completely at odds with the duties of a public official. The reformist hero was now being portrayed as a tyrant. This series of revelations was the point of no return. The Enley affair was not just a personal matter, it was a public disgrace that had compromised the integrity of the entire sheriff's office. The trust that the people of San Mateo County had placed in Christina Corpus was now completely broken. The political currency she had worked so hard to build was now worthless, tarnished by scandal, deceit, and a breathtaking abuse of power. The community's investment had gone bust, and the fallout was only just beginning. The focus now shifted from her actions to how the community would hold her accountable. As the scandals mounted, the people of San Mateo County realized they had a problem. Under existing California law, they had elected a sheriff, but they had no clear mechanism to remove her from office, no matter how egregious her misconduct. The power to fire an elected sheriff simply did not rest with the county board of supervisors. This left the public feeling helpless, watching as the leader they had chosen seemed to operate with impunity. The Corpus coin, once a symbol of their empowerment, now represented their collective mistake, a bad investment with no apparent way to cut their losses. A sense of frustration and anger grew throughout the community, but the citizens and their local leaders refused to remain powerless. In a bold and historic move, a charter amendment was proposed and placed on the ballot. It was called Measure A. This measure was designed to do one simple but revolutionary thing: give the Board of Supervisors the authority to remove an elected sheriff from office for cause. It was a direct response to the crisis of leadership, a tool created by the people, for the people, to reclaim control over their own government. Measure A was not just a piece of legislation, it was a populist uprising, a clear statement that the public would not tolerate corruption or abuses of power from their elected officials. The campaign for Measure A was swift and decisive. Community groups, local newspapers, and concerned citizens rallied in support, urging voters to take back their power. The message was clear: no one should be above the law, especially not the county's top law enforcement officer. In March 2025, the people of San Mateo County delivered a resounding verdict. An overwhelming 84% of voters, over 90,000 people, approved Measure A. This was not a narrow political victory. It was a landslide, a powerful demonstration of a community united in its demand for accountability. They had forged a new tool to fix their broken investment. The passage of Measure A was a watershed moment in California history. It fundamentally shifted the balance of power, creating a vital check on the authority of an elected office that had long been considered untouchable. The voters had effectively devalued the Corpus coin, on their own terms, asserting that its worth was conditional on performance and integrity. They had sent an unmistakable message not only to Sheriff Corpus, but to elected officials everywhere. Public trust is not a lifetime guarantee. It is a loan from the people, and when that trust is broken, the people have the right to call it in. With Measure A now law, the stage was set for an unprecedented confrontation. The San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, now armed with the power to act, initiated formal removal proceedings against Sheriff Christina Corpus. They hired the prestigious law firm Keeker, Van Nest, and Peters to conduct an independent investigation, ensuring the process would be thorough and impartial. The county was about to put its own sheriff on trial in the court of public opinion and administrative law. The value of Corpus coin was now a flat zero, and the proceedings were about determining the final cost of the failed investment. In August 2025, a 10-day public hearing began, captivating the attention of the entire region. It was a dramatic and often tense affair, with 36 witnesses taking the stand and 174 evidentiary exhibits being presented. The hearing laid bare the full extent of the rot within the sheriff's office. Colleagues testified about the toxic work environment, the retaliation, the inappropriate relationship with Enley, and the shocking abuse of power. Corpus, in turn, defended herself vigorously. She filed a $10 million lawsuit against the county, claiming she was the victim of a politically motivated hack job and was being targeted because she was a Latina woman. The community watched as the evidence mounted. The testimony painted a damning picture, one that stood in stark contrast to the hopeful image Corpus had projected just a few years earlier. The independent investigation concluded that there was ample evidence to support the allegations of serious misconduct. To provide a final, neutral assessment, the board appointed a retired Superior Court Judge, James Emerson, to review the case and issue a formal advisory opinion. The entire county held its breath, waiting for the judge's recommendation. It felt like the final chapter in a tragic saga that began with so much promise. On October 6, 2025, Judge Emerson delivered his findings. He concluded that there were multiple legally justifiable reasons for Sheriff Corpus's removal from office. His opinion was a methodical and devastating takedown of her defense, validating the claims of her accusers and confirming the public's worst fears. The advisory opinion left the Board of Supervisors with a clear path forward. The long and painful process of uncovering the truth was over. All that remained was the final vote, a historic decision that would set a precedent for years to come. The fate of Sheriff Corpus was now sealed. On October 14, 2025, the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors convened for one of the most consequential votes in its history. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. One by one, the supervisors spoke, their words echoing the community's profound sense of betrayal. Board President David Canepa declared that Corpus had placed personal interest over public duty. Supervisor Jackie Spire, a veteran politician, called the situation the end of a tragic, destructive, and grossly expensive chapter in the county's history. The dream of reform had curdled into a nightmare of scandal, and it was time to put an end to it. During the hearing, Sheriff Corpus made one final, defiant stand. "If I lose my position today, I will walk out with my head held up very high," she stated, maintaining her innocence to the very end. Her attorney continued to frame the proceedings as a political witch hunt, but their arguments fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming, and the public's mandate, delivered through Measure A, was clear. The board was not just acting on its own, it was carrying out the will of the people who had demanded accountability. The time for debate was over. The time for a decision had come. The vote was unanimous. The 5 members of the Board of Supervisors all voted to remove Christina Corpus from the office of sheriff, effective immediately. In that moment, California history was made. Never before had a county board of supervisors removed a sheriff from office. The Corpus coin, once a shining symbol of hope and progress, had been officially and permanently taken out of circulation. The experiment had failed, and the institution that had been entrusted to her was now in need of a leader who could begin the long and difficult process of rebuilding public trust. In the immediate aftermath, the board appointed Undersheriff Dan Perea as the acting sheriff, a move intended to bring stability back to the fractured department. Though Corpus had initially vowed to appeal the decision, she instead opted to retire, a move that allowed her to retain medical benefits for her family. The saga of Sheriff Christina Corpus was over. She had risen to power on a promise of a new era, but her tenure ended in historic disgrace, a stark and public lesson in the fragility of political capital and the ultimate power of a community that refuses to be ignored. Today, on December 2nd, 2025, the story of Corpus coin serves as a powerful cautionary tale for communities across America. It is a vivid reminder that political capital, no matter how high its initial value, is not a permanent asset. It is a currency based entirely on public trust, and once that trust is squandered through arrogance, cronyism, and the abuse of power, it can become utterly worthless. The rise and fall of Christina Corpus demonstrates that a compelling story and a charismatic personality are not enough to sustain leadership. True value lies in integrity, accountability, and a genuine commitment to public service. The legacy of this saga is not just one of scandal, but also one of citizen empowerment. The creation and passage of Measure A stands as a landmark achievement in local governance. It proves that when a community unites, it can forge the tools it needs to hold its leaders accountable, even those in powerful, long-protected positions. This is a lesson that transcends San Mateo County. It shows that democratic systems are not static. They can be amended and improved to meet the challenges of the moment. The people are not simply passive investors in their leaders, they are active shareholders who have the right and the ability to protect their investment. For San Mateo County, the work of rebuilding is underway. The sheriff's office is now tasked with healing deep internal wounds and restoring its reputation in the eyes of the public. Calls for greater oversight, including the appointment of a permanent inspector general, have grown louder, reflecting a desire to ensure that such a catastrophic failure of leadership can never happen again. The community paid a high price for its initial investment in Corpus coin, not in dollars, but in trust, morale, and faith in its institutions. The focus now is on making long-term investments in transparency and structural reform. Ultimately, the history of Corpus coin is a uniquely American story. It is about the promise of change, the danger of unchecked power, and the enduring strength of a citizenry that demands better. It teaches us to be wise investors in the political marketplace, to look beyond the shiny promises and examine the underlying character and principles of those we elevate to power. The coin itself was an illusion, a metaphor for a movement built on a fragile foundation, but the outcome was very real, a historic affirmation that in a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, the final authority always rests with the people themselves.